I think the key is, you know, what Shakespeare said, the play's the thing. And that's what really interested me more than anything else, and the ghost story aspect of it. These people trapped at the bottom of the ocean for 100 some odd years, and then they arise to seek revenge on the people who did them in. To me, that's a fun story to tell.
David called me and he said, hey, you know, we're gonna meet writers on this project, this remake of The Fog, and I think you'd be really great for it. You know, if you are so inclined, why don't you come up with a take?
The screenwriter of The Fog, Cooper Lane, is a really talented young man and came up with several pages of ideas about The Fog, and they were really terrific.
Once they decided that they liked the take that I presented to them, then they basically said, go away and write that, okay? Which is, you know, it's kind of nice. You know, there weren't a bunch of notes, there weren't a bunch of, you know, try this, try that. It was like, go write it, and then let us read it, and then we'll talk about it after that.
So it was like a menu. We just sort of decided to buy a little of this and buy a little of that. And he did a fabulous job of keeping the essential story, essential, I say, but really changing it quite a bit.
Hell of a fog paint.
We hadn't even finished the script, and I kept saying, you know, we should hire a director, get a director right on this right away, because inevitably a director comes in and changes things, so get it over with at the beginning, you know?
Rupert was brought on. We were about, I guess, around page 30 in the original script. I mean, not in the original script, but in my original draft, we were around page 30 when Rupert came on board.
Cooper had already been working on the script for, I guess, 2 months by the time I came on, and he had written. The first scene was originally about 12 or 15 pages of the guys rowing out to the Elizabeth Dane and torching it and rowing away. And then we would go and we would watch the rest of the movie. Now, I really liked that. That's what drew that's what drew me into the whole movie. But Cooper had a point that if we gave away too much in the beginning, that the audience, there would be no mystery.
Now what happens is the movie starts in a much more of an innocuous way. We know something weird happened, but we don't know exactly what it was. And then it takes us through into the beginning of Act 3 until we actually really learn what these townspeople did to the lepers, you know, 100 years ago. And all of a sudden, hopefully, everything that we've been introduced to up to that point in the story begins to make sense.
Something definitely happened in 1871. What turned it all around?
One of the things that I decided was that it wasn't enough just to have a horror story where ghosts come back for a gold cross. I mean, it's fun, but why do ghosts want a gold cross? What are they going to do with it? So I always felt there had to be something more that they were after.
In the original movie, that Jamie Lee Curtis character just kind of shows up. She's a hitchhiker. She has no real destination. She's just on her way from point A to point B, and she happens along this town. In our movie, Elizabeth, which is the Maggie Grace character, she comes back because she's been haunted by these images that she's seen in a dream. And so, you know, she's got a reason to be back as opposed to, you know, a person who's just passing through.
One of the main things that I wanted to do was explore the idea of Elizabeth going on this totally unique journey and basically being so that Blake was reaching out to find the love of his life. So in a sense, adding romance to it and adding this sort of blurring between the two worlds, it seems to me much more likely that ghosts will come back for a person that they're in love with, rather than a piece of gold. So the first thing I did was persuade Cooper not to write that in the first draft, because I knew that the first draft would have so many notes all over it that if we put it in the first draft that it would never survive. So what I did was, once I'd persuaded him that this was a good idea, he wrote the first draft and we deliberately left that out, so that when we had it in the second draft, when the studio had a lot of their notes addressed, this new idea was in there and everybody fell in love with it.
The interesting thing is, when trying to create characters in a horror movie, is that you try to make the best, richest, funniest, you know, smartest, dumbest, wherever your emphasis is, character that you can, right? And then you turn those pages in, and the studio reads the pages, and the studio says, okay, this is great character stuff. We really love these characters. However, these 5 pages in here that we've devoted towards character development and character need to be scary.
It killed him. The fog killed him.
I had a certain idea about how to go about making the fog be a character, And of course, everything changes as it goes along. But that was kind of the angle that we were all on at the time.
The fog is a central character to the piece. In the original, they weren't able to manipulate the fog the way we can do it now. But nobody wanted the fog to be, nobody wanted characters made out of fog, but we did want the fog to actually have a life of its own and to be able to, sabotage the generator, cause Selma Blair's character's car to crash, and to be central, not only what comes out of the fog, but for the fog to be a central character in the movie. How do you basically, write to animate something that is inanimate, like fog? It was hard for me to write that. It's hard for me to write, I don't know what the fog looks like, but yet it's doing stuff, right? So I had to make a leap in my own mind of how I saw what the fog would do. So in my mind, the fog probably was a little more animate than in Rupert's mind, or maybe even in the studio's mind. So we started with the fog, really able to do a lot of things that regular fog wouldn't be able to do. And then we had to scale that back bit by bit by bit so that eventually what it does is believable, and there's rules, but what's within the fog, that's where the danger lies, is what's within the fog.
It's really kind of interesting if you look at some of the bigger movies that were released, The Ring, The Grudge, they take themselves dead seriously. It's not they're not comedies. They take their stories seriously. And that's the real issue. It's not a commodity. You have to respect the story and tell it with all seriousness.
The story that I wanted to tell was Elizabeth's story as she basically went through this incredible journey and reconnected with her dead husband. Once I realized that was my story, everything else had to fit in to support that story.
You try to lay it foundation, and then you have to take little pieces of the foundation away and move them around, and hopefully what remains is still enough so that you feel like you know who the characters are and where they've come from and where they're going. Whether we do or not, it's up to the audience to decide.
My partner and I, Deborah Hill, who died this year, decided that we would try to do a remake of The Fog. We tried to set it up, and we hooked up with David Foster, and we got a green light from Revolution, so here we are.
One of my colleagues at my office, this is a young fella named Shane Riches, came into my office one day and said, "Why don't you talk to John Carpenter about remaking The Fog?" I called John and I said, "Let's have lunch and talk about it." So he said, "How did we get his line?" He said, "Yeah, go ahead, make me rich." In 48 hours, we had a deal. There is a history that I have with John. I produced The Thing for John. He's the most comfortable guy to work with. To me, he was the key.
The genesis of the original Fog was, it happened in England, and Deborah Hill and I were over there, and we're at Stonehenge, and we saw some fog drifting, and kind of the possibilities of it kind of intrigued us. And I thought it would be fun to do a ghost story.
Who is that?
It was never a favorite of my films, but regardless, I didn't want to direct again. I've done it once, and I don't want to do it again, but perhaps some young genius can take it over and make it better.
And action, Ken!
We were all taken with Stigmata, which was directed by our director, Rupert Wainwright.
When I came in to meet with the studio the first time, I said, here's my point of view about this remake. I want to be like a doctor. First, do no harm. So any scene that's great and works, we just don't want to mess with it.
I think Rupert's image of vision is more related to some films that he's seen that he loved, like The Ring, the original Ring. Although you certainly don't want to copy those, but in feel, that's the kind of movie he keeps talking about.
Well, every director has a slightly different style, and what interested me about Rupert Wainwright's style, he uses inserts and close-ups for texture and timing, so that the speed can increase in the film.
John was very much, he left me to do my thing. He wanted everyone to be able to make their own movie. He kept his distance.
From a business point of view, horror films are young people's films. So we specifically went out and said, okay, let's get some popular, attractive, young actors and actresses in this film. And we really zeroed in on Tom Welling and Maggie Grace.
I played Nick Castle. My character exists in the first Fog as well, a bit younger in this version. And myself and my estranged girlfriend, who's now back in town, Elizabeth, we try to figure out what's going on in the fog and why things are happening.
Tom was great. I mean, I've never seen somebody turn up, you know, so prepared and yet working so hard. I mean, the first 3 or 4 weeks of shooting, he was still doing, first 5 weeks, I think, he was still doing Smallville. So it was very tough for him. I mean, he would shoot like an entire night with us on Sunday night, and then Monday morning, just drive straight to work.
One day, he finished Sunday at about 7 o'clock in the morning. It was a night shoot. 7 in the morning, showered, got dressed, and went to work on Smallville.
Blood for blood.
I play Elizabeth. She hitchhikes into town at the beginning as she did in the original, but it's a very different character than the one Jamie Lee Curtis played. She is from the town in question and has a lot of history there and a lot of history with Nick as well.
You know, Maggie has this very quiet, calm, you know, demeanor, but really there's a real strong quality inside her. And that's what comes out in the movie, I think. There's this real pent-up, tense, nervous energy, which I think is great for her character.
It's nice to play a female character that is empowered and gets in on all the action and isn't being carried through the movie the whole time. She's definitely figuring things out the whole time and sometimes gets a little further ahead even. So that's been nice.
Listen up. Got a low tide warning in the AM for you, and as I check my lighthouse gauges, looks like the whole barometer is on the rise.
Selma is great because you've got a character who's all on her own in one room, and she's got to really make that character come alive. So to me, having her play that role was a real blessing because she has so much character and so much, you know, so much fun in her. She's a fantastic actress, obviously, but you know, you could be a fantastic actress and still be, the scenes could get a little dull, but because she's so fun and crazy, you know, it adds a lot to the role.
I play a woman who works in the lighthouse. I have a small radio station there. I do the weather reports, and I'm the one that can kind of tell everyone where to go. You know, I can kind of navigate, you know, people to safety.
I play Spooner, who's working with Nick Castle on the boat on the Seagrass. I'm pretty much the free spirit guy, the funny guy, the relief, you know, the comedically speaking. And I wasn't even, there was no portrayal of this character in the original. Although the Seagrass was attacked, everyone died. Everyone perished on the first one, and now I'm here, you know what I mean? So it's a good character. It's a good role.
D-Ray adds levity to all situations. He's an all-around fun guy to have on the set, and I think he's bringing some great things to his role as well. But just to have him around is a good thing.
D-Ray is a funny stand-up comic, and we just think he's terrific. And so that's but it was really a specific plan to go after fresh, young faces that are popular with the young people out there today.
There it was, gone.
Find Vancouver, a really beautiful city. It's doubling for Oregon coast. Pretty much looks the same. You can look out there, you see the snow in the mountains, and it's 70 degrees outside sometimes.
What's tough about Vancouver is the changeability of the weather. I always said to people, this movie, if we have to have a sunny day and it's all fogged in, it's a weather day for us. Everyone's like, yeah, whatever. And then, one day we travel all this distance to go and find a great location, and we totally got fogged in. And it was literally just shooting like in front of a white card.
We were out for 2 days on this schooner. It's supposed to be, normal night, It started pouring rain. On the weekend, it poured all weekend long, and we were shooting in the rain, and people are running around, and it's not supposed to be raining in the scene. And all the wardrobe, it's period clothes because it's 1860 something or other. Oh my God, the flames and the water's hitting the flames, and it's like crazy.
I've heard several reasons why horror films are being remade. One, I think, probably is the simplest explanation is a lot of kids have heard of these movies, but they've never really seen them. Maybe they've heard their older brothers or their parents talk about them, so it's in their consciousness, but they've never paid attention. But in general, there's a cultural mindset right now that says anything over 15 years old is kind of dead and old-fashioned. And so in order to make it viable again, we need to take it out and kind of give it a fresh coat of paint and try to revise the corpse.
It is sort of a retelling in a totally different way. It's almost like a translation of a movie. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, it wouldn't exist without John's movie, which is great, but there's a whole other layer added to it now. And that couldn't have been added if there wasn't an amazing foundation to start with. But I hope people will be able to go, wow, it's like, I can like chicken and I can like beef, but I don't necessarily have to compare the two, you know what I mean?
The original film, which I shot in 1979, cost $1 million. I believe we had 2 big Valley Fog machines and some small smokers. And this film has 27 or 28 times the budget.
Well, we had about 40 fog machines or 30 fog machines. So we had this fellow named Bob Comer who had an army of people, and they created fog.
I think the challenge for us on this particular movie was to try and achieve the atmospherics, meaning the fog, sufficiently enough for the director. There's a lot up in the air. It was a very complicated thing to do.
We tried to get all the fog effects practically. That's how we started off. So we have like angry fog and sneaky fog and all these different characters, because the fog is a personality. So we really wanted to get that personality of it doing things.
Over a period of about a month, we had people doing all kinds of tests with all kinds of very complicated equipment, making different kinds of smoke.
Bob came up with a couple of great things. One was this big device just full of dry ice, forcing steam into it. So it would come out in this big billowing sort of caterpillar of fog. And when it came over water, it would come as a sort of a carpet. But when it hit something like the side of the boat, it would come up and over and tumble into the boat. So that we call sneaky fog. And then there's angry fog. What that is 3 guys with lights strapped to them with asbestos layers behind because the lights were burning so hard. And with 2 fog machines running towards you with the fog just billowing, but lit up from inside.
When it came down to it, some of the simplest forms of smoke were the best.
They're everywhere.
Rupert Wainwright was wonderful on this from the beginning. He had a pretty solid idea on what he wanted. So that was really sort of set the tone design-wise and really gave us something to work from right from the beginning.
First of all, Toby and I would work on taking the face of the actor. Then we would, then Toby would go ahead and do Photoshop experiments on top of it, and then put scars on all the rest of it. So we'd get a rough idea based on a photo of the actor's face. But then, of course, you have to recreate that in 3D on the actor's face, and everything changes.
Life casting is sort of the first process in almost any prosthetic build. And we life cast Rade in just a straightforward sort of 3/4 plaster bust of him. And we built his leprosy appliances from that cast. The 2 different main designs in this are our disease look and our ghost look. Had a similar play where they had lesions that had kind of gone further with the rot into their ghost look. We took the appliances that were just, sort of 1/8 inch thick for the most part, and we painted on the back of the appliances so that you actually had that tone reading through, which is something you can't do with foam latex. So that was a nice trick that really kind of plays the light well. The entire process for Rade was, we got down to about 3 hours, so it wasn't bad. I mean, earlier on, the first few times out, when we're still kind of developing the method of application and the paint scheme, we were looking more around 5 hours, so it was great. He was really happy when we got closer to 3. You take that and you put that onto an 18-hour shooting day plus an hour removal. It doesn't leave you much time to sleep.
I think one of the most amazing pieces that Toby came up with is not just the leper makeup on Blake, but also on all the other lepers. Like when you see the hold of the ship and you see all of those faces, some of them were so freaky, we barely managed to shoot them, and we would cover them in shadow so you couldn't really see them terribly well. And then when they all come back, when they're in the graveyard, you see those faces again. It's really shocking. And so I think he did really a truly amazing job.
The prosthetics is wonderful, but it's always an additive process. The guys in visual effects, Chris Watts, was involved early on, right from the beginning when I first came in on this show.
The makeup that Toby built was really only halfway to what Rupert wanted to see Blake looking like in the movie. He's supposed to have been underwater for 160 years, so his character in the movie is supposed to have a nose missing, and a good portion of his face is missing, and you can see his teeth and his skull through the face. So really what we needed to do was cover up those things that we couldn't remove from the actor, like a nose, with a CG representation of a face with no nose. In order to keep that face from sliding around, it's basically an assistive device to the artists who are doing that work to put these little red LED lights on Rade's face.
The special effects came up with some really fine little low wattage LEDs for us, and we just sunk them in underneath the appliances, just little red pinpoints of light that visual effects uses to track in the separate piece we built for Rade from cast of his appliances on his life mold.
These days, as with any sort of technique that's advanced over the years, you get a lot more opportunities to to try out different things. So if if the director is looking for a particular effect and hasn't been able to quite get it the first try, computers basically make it a lot faster for you to be able to try many different things.
Basically, there's 2 shots in the movie of an underwater ghost, and what they did is they actually had an actress who was underwater with lights on them, and basically comes up to Stevie's car after her car flips off the cliff after being hit by a truck. And what we did in that was we playing the footage backwards, having her kind of slide in so the hair moves, very strangely. We tracked in skulls on top of her face, and then also rendered out what we called caustic passes, which is basically, a caustic is what you see at the bottom of a swimming pool. When the sunlight's shining through, it's kind of that weird rippling pattern. And we basically were projecting that on her face, and then doing tricks where we would grab different parts of her and then sliding it in time. So different parts of her would be moving at different speeds, and it was like this really just kind of bizarre looking, frightening scene that, like in the middle of this dark black ocean where she's fallen into, this like white ghost kind of pops out at her for a good scare. And then from a technical standpoint, when you have, an actor underwater, you have bubbles coming out of their mouth and that. So that was actually one of the big challenges on that shot is even though they're trying to hold their breath, bubbles are coming out and of course they're crossing the face. So we had to do a lot of cleanup work, removing all the bubbles, removing, all the soot, and then cleaning up some lighting and rigs and that before we could even start on the effects on that sequence. In the scene where Kathy, who's played by Sarah Botsford, gets pulled out the window, that shot had some interesting challenges as well. Basically, we had Kathy shot in camera. There was real fog on the set there that was kind of swirling around her legs. Another plate was shot, which was a stunt woman who was in a rig, and she gets pulled out through the window and crashes the glass in that, and she's on a wire. So the first challenge was just blending those two. In situations where we have 2 plates such as this, we have to seamlessly blend the one actress into the stunt woman. And we do certain amounts of patchwork. We're trying to make sure that the set, the windows, and angle lines up perfectly. And then we actually use this sort of technique that was common in the 90s, the morphing phenomena that everyone's familiar with, to actually blend the one plate of the actress into the stunt woman. And then once we get that done, which that itself is a lot of work, we then had to create multiple layers of digital fog. There was an ambient sort of creepy fog layer that was added to the in-camera stuff. And then in that particular shot, to motivate her getting pushed out the window, we have a separate sort of thrust of fog that comes in. And it's a little bit higher and just comes up out of the ground fog, and it's kind of scary. In the footage of Tom Malone getting pushed through the streets, there's 2 things going on in those scenes. We have Blake, who we need to make him transparent and add a sort of fog effect coming off of him. And then the second thing was that Tom Malone has, basically the actor's wearing a rig, this sort of circular harness rig that they've had that allowed him to be pulled along and allowed him to kind of spin in multiple axes.
We wanted him to look like he was being sort of driven by a force field. And so what we did was we put like a trapeze artist's rotator gag around his waist. And this was mainly done by the stuntman, to be honest. And then put 2 ropes on the side of that and pulled him real hard so he could kind of spin and flip and rotate as he went, but he was being pulled. And then we have Rade walk exactly the right distance right behind him, so it looks like he's pushing him along.
That scene was all about rig removal and getting rid of the big stunt rig and the 2 guys on either side and the wires that held them up. And then we just we did the Blake treatment behind him and added some fog behind him. The second part of that scene was in the graveyard. That was shot somewhere else entirely.
For the burning sequence of Malone at the end, what we did is as a kind of combination of 2 things. One, we first took the plates of the actor wearing the burn mask, because there's issues, he has, obviously bigger hands, slightly bigger face from wearing the safety mask. So the first thing we'll do is actually try to go in there and warp and kind of suck the face back in, to kind of shrink the head back to normal size, bring the hand, shrink the hands in a little bit. And then what we do is we track a digital character over his body, and then we start actually emitting CG fire coming off. So it's going to be a combination of CG fire to help cover up, some of the parts of the mask, so you can obviously tell it's him, but we're just kind of filling in some of the blank spots, and then also tracking in live action fire elements. So it's kind of a combination of those three tricks to make that sequence play out. The end scene of the movie is a challenge because not only do we have the Elizabeth character interacting with a ghost Blake, and the characters are all transforming several times during the course of one shot.
That was shot on the last night of shooting, and it was a fairly complicated shot, probably the most complicated shot of the movie. Essentially, what we needed to do for that shot was we needed to get Elizabeth and Blake doing the motions of kissing in 4 different costumes and rotating in exactly the same way each time. And then also we needed to get them kissing each other without the other person, because they're transparent. When Blake's head passes in front of Elizabeth's head, you need to see Elizabeth's face through the back of Blake's head. So if you actually have them both on set, obviously the back of Blake's head, since he's not really transparent, will be obscuring Elizabeth's face. So really what you need to do is you need to get Elizabeth mocking a fake kiss without anybody there.
Both the Elizabeth character and the Blake character are going through several transformations. So we have Elizabeth going from herself to a ghost version of herself from the past. We have there's a certain amount of leprosy effects that are actually transitioning in and out during the shot as the camera's spinning around them in 360. We also have background players that were minions that were on the Elizabeth Dane boat. They're going through a transformation, and by the end of the shot, Elizabeth has completely transformed. So it's a long, continuous shot. You don't have any cuts or editing to help you hide what's going on. So there's many, many layers at play there. And one of the cool things about the shot is at certain parts of the shot, the different actors are transparent, and you actually see the other characters passing through behind them. One of the things that really makes this movie different than the original is that, just the sense of scope and scale to some of the shots that we were able to do just because of new technology and, things that they couldn't have ever done in the original.
Filmmakers back then, we didn't have at our disposal what filmmakers now have, which is a lot of technical tricks to enhance and even make it more frightening.